It's July 17th, Ukraine Media Center starts its operation. My name is Svetlana Shprinka, and let me remind you that from this moment, Ukraine Media Center cooperates with Suspilne on the community space platform, Urban Space 500. And now we will be talking about the heat in Ukraine. Joining us online is Natalia Ptukha, spokesperson of the Ukrainian Hydrometeorological Center. Good morning, Ms. Natalia. Good morning. So, Ms. Natalia, everybody is curious about what's going on with the weather. What is the cause of this abnormal heat that Ukraine is experiencing for the last year? Well, really, now we're experiencing abnormal heat in Ukraine. The temperature indicators are, in some meteorological stations, the absolute maximums. And the reason for this heat is a number of factors. In the last week, a high-pressure field was influencing the weather in Ukraine. I mean, the anticyclone that ensures weather with less clouds, without precipitations. But again, we're not in the epicenter of this anticyclone, but we're on the peripheral fraction of it. That's why we were able to observe some instability in the atmosphere. The air masses were not dry. There was some humidity observed, and there could be some spots of rainstorms and sometimes even the bursts of wind with hail, but those phenomena had local nature. And starting from tomorrow, even today, the rainy weather may cover more of the territory of Ukraine due to restriction of the atmospheric front. Again, another reason for such heat is the hot air masses coming from southeast. In the beginning of this week, there were air masses coming from the northern part of African continent, the tropical air masses, and the aggregation of those factors, the low pressure field with the hot air masses, resulted in such an effect. The sun could add additional heat to these hot masses of air without any obstacles and restrictions. Well, basically, it's called a heat wave, quite an intense one that we're observing this year. So starting from tomorrow, or even from the second half of today, we'll start experiencing normal summer with normal temperature. Well, I cannot safely state so far because those hot air masses are still observed in our territory. The air got heated pretty intensely, but we expect those air masses to change, specifically in western and northern parts of our country. And during this restructuring, there will be active rainstorms, because a lot of energy should go somewhere, a lot of this heat energy that will result in raining, intense raining, specifically in north and west. Then that weather will move to the center and spread to the rest of the regions of Ukraine, where we will be witnessing some restructuring of weather fronts. So tomorrow morning, we forecast the weather to be pretty hot, but by daytime, the structure will come into effect, and we will expect to see the daily temperature in the north and west at about 30 degrees centigrade. For the center, south, and east of our country, the change will happen a little bit later, and unfortunately, the weather will not go down to 30 and will be staying at the level of about 35 degrees centigrade. But given the fact that those regions are currently experiencing abnormal heat with the temperature reaching 40-41 degrees centigrade, then such a reduction down to 35 degrees will be quite a relaxing effect. Well, is really such a heat an abnormal effect for Ukraine? Because every summer we keep experiencing temperature peaks about 30 degrees. Can we call this specific period abnormal? Well, actually, yes, we can call this heat abnormal, because many temperature records were beaten. For example, there are temperature records for specific days, like for every specific meteorological station. For example, in Vinnytsia on the 13th of July, the maximum temperature was such, and then all of the 13th of July every year are being compared, and this year's temperature resulted to be the top record one. So all those temperatures are submitted to the database along with the minimal indicators. For example, we had very warm nights. The temperature was not falling below certain indicators. And in many meteorological stations, those indicators were recorded for many days. But there are such records as absolute maximums, basically meaning the temperature that was ever recorded at certain specific meteorological monitoring station. And obviously every station has such an indicator, the maximum temperature ever documented. And such maximums were also reached within the last days in Vinnytsia, Kropivnitsky, Mykolaiv, and a number of other regions. We post this information, those lists, on our official web resources, which meteorological surveillance stations have beaten those records, along with absolute maximums. For example, absolute maximum for Ukraine is plus 42 in Luhansk Meteorological Surveillance Station. That was documented on the 12th of August, 2010. Which means that we never ever documented temperature as high as that. So plus 42 was never ever documented, even during this heat wave this summer. And for Kyiv, the absolute maximum is 39.4. That was documented in the summer of 1934. So that's the absolute maximum temperature for Kyiv. And hopefully it will not be higher, because so far we have not achieved that maximum. And talking about the abnormal nature of this temperature, well, first of all, it's related to climate change, as many meteorologists say. For example, there is a United States-based meteorological center, so-called Climate Center, that has developed the climate change index that is calculated for the whole of the globe. And that heat period that was dominating the Ukrainian territory, that was the maximum fifth level index for many regions, not only of Ukraine, also the southeast of Europe were experiencing the same effects, like the Balkans, for example. The temperature absolute maximums were beaten there too. So high probability of this index says that the probability of such temperatures that high, would be impossible without climate change, or is infinitesimal. And probability of it being related with climate change is maximum. Well, we understand climate change, global warming, but there is also a local Ukrainian problem caused by our enemy, the warfare going on for the last 2.5 years or the last 10 years. Do they influence the weather change? Do we have any statistics that may prove to be demonstrative? Well, that's a very specific topic. I know that in the Ukrainian Institute of Hydrometeorology, there are certain researches underway. I mean, the influence of war on the weather factors. This correlation is being researched, but talking specifically about it as a direct factor influencing the weather in Ukraine, for us as an operative synoptics, well, it's a little bit different scale. The movement of air masses, compared to them, those are very intense meteorological and climatic processes, and local expressions cannot influence them. Yes, they can contribute, but they cannot change the climate globally, to be named as one of the key reasons. Well, it's an additional factor, but its influence is evaluated as not high enough. However, the researches are underway, and we should ask the scientists as soon as they come up with the results of their analysis. Can we expect the situation with the heat to be deteriorating year to year? Well, it is so. Such trends are currently being observed. Such conditions were not only dominating in Ukraine, but also southeastern Europe, Balkans, and in the United States. They were also documenting the absolute maximums for all of the history of meteorological observations. Such trend is being observed year to year, and those heat waves, they are becoming increasingly larger and during warm time of the year and smaller during the cold time of the year. The climatologists keep saying about it, like every last month was becoming the one with the record high temperatures all around the globe, and currently we are like 1/2 of a degree above the forecasted temperature. Well, we were always said that we live in the moderate continental climate. Is it still so? Can we still call our climate as moderate continental? Well, definitely it remains such. There are no cardinal changes that would allow us to say that the climate has completely changed in Ukraine, that now we live in other climatic zones. There are no reasons to state so, but yes, we may state that we are observing some changes, specifically in the southern regions. There are both bright and dark sides to it. Both the minuses prevail, but for example, talking about the advantages, the agrarians try to grow new cultures that require accumulation of higher effective temperatures, and now they get this opportunity so that the crops that are more adapted to growing in the warm climate can now grow. But there is a problem with irrigation because the southern regions always had difficult situation with irrigation of their lands, and now that we had a catastrophe with the Kakhovka Dam, we are going to get additional problems there. So again, there are pluses and there are minuses, but generally the fact that the climate is changing is already being confirmed by the scientists, and we should better adapt to those conditions and think on how we can influence less on this process. And I think it depends more on the global political decisions and those who take those decisions. So let's get back to the forecast. What should we expect by the end of July, and should we expect to see the new temperature peaks in August? Well, the nearest perspective is the reduction of temperature. However, we don't expect to see such extreme heat. It will go away, but after that, on about 18th or 19th of July, there will be another anticyclone influencing the weather in Ukraine. It will contain less hot air masses in its system, but still the high temperatures will be retained in Ukraine, such as more inherent in summer weather. But within the next 10 days there will be no drastic changes, but then after that it's difficult to predict any tendencies, because in these conditions of climate change the atmosphere is changing quite dramatically. All of the processes are happening quite drastically. So the most practical forecast you can rely upon is up to 10 days all around the globe. Well, thank you, Ms. Natalia, for your comprehensive answers. Let me remind you, we were talking to Natalia Ptukha, spokesperson of the Ukrainian Hydrometeorological Center, and we will continue our work. At 12:30, we will be talking about the tactics of an enemy in the Black Sea. Stay tuned.